Well, there was once a restaurant in Columbus that might have started back in the 30s, even, certainly by the 40s. It was called The Dell, Dell. It was on Parsons, just 2 blocks south of East Broad Street. And Parsons still is, but back then maybe more so, a pretty busy commercial street. It wasn't a through street simply because it ended at Broad. But it was a neighborhood, and in fact, there were some Welsh relatives of ours that lived on Franklin in the first block of Franklin, um, between Parsons and I guess 17th or Monroe. So anyway, the Dell at some point became reputed for singing waiters. So it was a full service restaurant, probably had a bar. It certainly did in later years. Um, and this went on. I've never talked to anybody that was ever in the place any earlier than the 70s, maybe the 80s. But the ownership would change hands, but they never changed the name. So it was Adele for a long, long time. It came to my attention when Les and Betty left the deli that they had set up in the Short North and joined two other people, Jack Coca and his wife. His wife I never got to know, but she was a food purveyor. She was a sales person for restaurants, and that's how her and Jack met. And Jack had a background. He had at least a master's degree, and I think he was working towards his doctorate in marine biology or something of that nature, because he oftentimes worked up at Ohio State's got a marine biology laboratory near on the west end of Lake Erie, near Toledo. So um, we're we're at the North Market. I think by this time we were still working on setting it up. Maybe we weren't open for business yet, but one Saturday I was in painting or doing something to set up, and Wayne Heil came down to me, and I hadn't even noticed. But Wayne Heil, who was always up there early anyway, and he was getting ready for his Saturday trade, and he had a big grin on his face. He could hardly contain himself. Now keep in mind, my first encounter with Wayne Heil, I thought he was going to hurt me. He was really pissed off at me, probably for a lot of reasons. I was a newbie, but I had this electrical appliance that we used like a hot plate, and it kept blowing the circuit, and it wasn't just my circuit. So Wayne's operation sometimes was down until the North Market found a way to fix it with an electrician. Um, I was afraid to turn anything on because uh, he did everything short of attack me. He stridently walked towards me, complaining about everything. But he was a racist. He really did not like the Indians at all. But a lot of other people didn't either, and it was because of the odor that Roger's cooking produced, which I had no idea about. And who else? There was a bakery down there. That's how I discovered Thurn's Buns. I would say Trapasso. That was their name, Trapasso. And they had a whole bunch of baked goods and stuff. But anyway, and then Kimes. So, so anyway, Wayne comes down because now he's no longer pissed at me. Or maybe he was to get pissed at me later. Maybe that was after we actually opened. Probably was. But he'd seen me working there, and if anything, he's going to respect me because I'm a working man. That was an important value of Wayne's. And he points over to the restaurant, and I look over there, and I notice there's nothing in there. Nothing. No appliances, No tables, no chairs. They even took the counter out. It was an entirely empty room. And they had done this between 7 p.m. Friday night and probably 5 a.m. Saturday morning. Gene Plank was his name. And that was Les and Betty. Les and Betty had the restaurant. They found another opportunity and they got out of Dodge. And because they knew Jack knew, well, I'm next. I'm going to get that restaurant. And he did. He did. But what Wayne was laughing at was another guy that got up early to open was Gene Plank. And Gene looked pretty 1950s square kind of guy. He even had one of those flat top haircuts and stuff. So he was no nonsense, down to earth, but a good merchant. You know, they made money. And he says when Gene got in to open his stand and he noticed the restaurant, he imitated Gene and he goes, he was standing there with his jaw hanging down to his knees. He could not believe. And I think at that time, Gene was the manager or the maybe the chair of the Merchants Association or something. He didn't have just a neighborly interest in this incident, you know. It was something that was affecting the whole market.
Like they hit town, sort of? Like they
they hit across town. They became the new owners with Jack and with his wife. And Martin. Poor Martin. There were 5 partners taking over the Dell. They had visions because they were not novices to this. They'd been around the world. They made it into a tapas bar, Columbus's first tapas bar. And emphasis on bar, but because of their other interest, live acts from anywhere. And we saw some great acts there more than once. Steve Fout will be always glad to tell the story of how I got humiliated by David Bromberg because I made the mistake of calling out a request. And I might have and we were sitting in the front row too. And it was a very small stage, very small house. The fire marshal had to come in and shut it down sometimes. More or less say, 3 people have to leave because they'd exceeded capacity.
Wow.
Oh, that happened a lot. And supposedly, one night the bar got robbed and nobody knew about it. It was so crowded. The robber got in, showed his gun, took the money, and got out.
Wow.
Somebody should be really writing this stuff down. I'm surprised they're not. But anyway, Martin was a true chef. He was also a paraplegic. So he was confined to a wheelchair. And
was a working chef?
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah. I remember Jack telling me that they were peeling jalapenos. No. For some recipe, he was peeling habaneros. And he was telling me how his fingers and hands would swell and puff up and stuff because of the toxins from the peppers. Because that's pretty hot pepper. But no, those 5 people kept that restaurant going. Again, I think they always fled just before the bill collectors came down because that was kind of Les's motif. And they could always retreat to Betty's business, you know, where her family business with the Peacock Kitchens. And Jack stayed at the North Market for a while because he never worked at the Dell. He just was hanging out there. But we saw John Sebastian there, Laura Nero. Not Kebmo, but what is that guy's name? He's been around forever. Black blues guy.
Taj Mahal?
Was it? I think it was. It was Taj Mahal. David Bromberg. Probably saw some others. I mean, it was, and you know, I don't know what filled in the gap when it closed. Probably closed still in the, well, no. We were in North Market in the 90s. I'm going to guess it was still open in the 90s, but I really don't know. Les's next job, he got a real estate license. Made money that way. Somebody ought to be writing this down. I'll try Googling it again. I know I've tried in the past. It's just kind of sad. There's a guy with the Columbus Historical Society, I forget his name, but he's already written books about old restaurants. In fact, I gave one to Nathan.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, and he might know some rumors he's heard, but he probably didn't experience the old Dell firsthand. You know, who knows how many of those were in Columbus? Reeves Restaurant. Reeves was, fortunately, it lasted long enough for us to go there. Liver and Onions. They're on Livingston Avenue on the corner of, down by where the bakery used to be. The German bakery. They were